Made a whole slide to remind myself to start recording.
Nice
Great.
touch.
Yep. It'll be copied into every slide in the future, so it'll definitely help. Okay, so I'll just start off with the really boring stuff. This is not a solicitation to buy or sell any security ever. This is not advice. You should read the characteristics and risks of standardized options. The results here are provided for general information purposes as a convenience to the viewers. The materials are not a substitute for obtaining professional advice from a qualified person, firm, or corporation. Trading futures and options involves the risk of loss. Please consider carefully whether futures or options are appropriate to your financial situation. Only risk capital should be used when trading futures or options. Investors could lose more than their initial investment. Past results are not necessarily indicative of future results. The risk of loss in trading can be substantial. Carefully consider the inherent risks of such investment in light of your financial condition. So I'm Jason Hitchings. I'm the CTO of Capital Market Labs. I've been at this with Ophir for about 8 years or so, and we worked together back at LiveVol that got bought by SIBA before that. So been around in this industry for quite a while. Great. So I'm going to give an introduction to TradeMachine in the form of a video, and then I'm going to walk through some of the major pieces of functionality, and then we'll take questions. I'm going to share my computer audio, and this will be fast. Let's see here. Caption stop recording. I am just looking for the share computer audio button. I don't think it's sharing audio yet.
It is not.
It's funny, I actually just... Oh, share sound. In my mind, I had a different menu option. Okay.
I can hear it now.
All right, so this will be fast. Thanks
John
for joining,
got
everyone.
great news. He just bought a new house and he's in a whole new neighborhood. Now that he's all moved in, he realized he has to figure out the best way to get to the grocery store. Little did John know, his quest for the best grocery route was about to offer him insights into something much bigger, much like the world of stock trading. On his first trip, he figured the fastest way to get there would be a straight line, and he tried that way first. Pretty confident he was all set, but it turns out that way has a 10-mile-per-hour limit. And even worse, it's a speed trap. His 10-minute drive turned into a 20-minute problem. So then John tried the next shortest route. After all, you can't get unlucky twice, right? He went west, and then he went north. This will work, he thought. And that was a really good route. He was all set, but later in the week, he faced a new challenge. A school at the corner meant unpredictable traffic patterns during weekdays, much like unforeseen market fluctuations. And that meant every Monday through Friday, both early in the morning when school started, or in the afternoon when school got out, this was just as bad as the slow speed trap. This route worked once, but when conditions changed, it didn't work at all. So then John thought he would take the path that went north and then west, and that would be the way he got to the grocery store. He could just take this route every time and not worry about changing conditions or days of the week. Well, that route worked fabulously well on the weekdays, but John soon discovered that on the weekends, this route had massive traffic jams. Months later, anyone watching John could see why he was so happy. He knew which route to take, on which day, and what time to get to the grocery store. Now he gets to the grocery store easily, now that he has a plan. A plan that is based on his experience in the past, his failures, and his successes. Ultimately, John reached his goal when he learned from history. It took a lot of drives to the grocery store for John to figure it out, but now he's happy. Now he knows exactly how to get to the grocery store, and exactly when and exactly which roads not to take. But in reality, there's many homes and there's many grocery stores, and they're all over. And it's not just grocery stores, it's every other store, and his friends' houses, and work. And there are many paths to take, many times, on different days, in different seasons, in different weather. Figuring out what route to take, on which day, and at which time, then also understanding which routes not to take, and which places not to go on certain days and times, well, this is all called a backtest. John used the past to help him decide what to do in the future, to get from his house to the grocery store. Imagine for a moment these everyday destinations, homes, grocery stores, workplaces. as stocks in the market. And instead of roads, think of these routes as different ways a stock can move. Just like John's routes, the stock market has many paths. A stock can be above the 200-day moving average, or below the 200-day moving average. It can be above the 200-day moving average, but below the 50-day moving average, but above the 10-day moving average, all at the same time. Stocks, much like roads, have their ups and downs. They can be on an upward trend or experiencing a downturn, affected by seasons, market events, and earnings reports. There are hundreds of millions of different patterns in the stock market for just a single stock, and there are tens of thousands of stocks in the market, each moving together and separately at the same time. Just as choosing the wrong road at the wrong time can lead to delays, choosing the wrong stock at the wrong time can lead to financial setbacks. So, how do you navigate this complex network? Enter TradeMachine, your financial GPS. It's a backtester designed to identify the most promising patterns. It tests hundreds of millions of different opportunities and patterns and shows you historically which ones did the best. And then we layer on our proprietary artificial intelligence on top of it. Our proprietary AI goes a step further. It doesn't just learn from historical patterns, it anticipates adapting to new market conditions, a bit like John's evolving understanding of his neighborhood's traffic flows. Because when it all comes down to it, while option trading can be very complex, all we really want to know is how to get from home to the bank.
Jason, you're muted still.
Thank you. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. It's probably fairly obvious to a lot of you who have used TradeMachine so far for a while or who are familiar with backtesting. But we like that video because we think it kind of gives a grasp of what's happening underneath, the hood of TradeMachine, and the idea that behind the scenes, we're testing hundreds of thousands of different strategies to unearth trends, to try to figure out things that tend to work well. Certainly, those are no guarantee it's going to work every time or always in the future. But I, for one, would sure as heck rather try to test a trade that's worked 7 out of 8 times in the past than go into something blind. Much like the way that traffic patterns get analyzed, for instance. Okay, so with that, I'm going to just dive into TradeMachine kind of from the front, and I'll just spend about 10 or 15 minutes showing off some of the main features, and then we'll dive straight into questions. Okay, so this is the Today tab, and what the Today tab is a collection of different strategies that we've developed using the backtester. We've done thousands and thousands of backtests, and the backtester looks at all kinds of different market conditions, technicals, earnings, etc. And we find strategies that have performed very well historically. And the nice thing about the Today tab is it's not just saying that this particular stock, VTR, has done well in the past. It's also saying that all of the technical conditions and earnings conditions that would need to be true in order to enter that trade today are in fact true as of the time that this notification gets sent to the screen. I'll make a quick note for new users that we wait about an hour before we start populating these results because there's so much market fluctuation at the beginning of the day. It can be a little confusing if something seems like it triggered but then goes away, if it essentially becomes active and then inactive again because of stock movement. And so to prevent that from happening too often, we wait about 60 minutes before we start triggering these alerts. So if you log in first thing in the morning, you probably will see triggers from the previous day, but you won't see today's triggers. So these are all different option strategies, and every one of these strategies will show how it's done in the past. This is the total return, this is the number of wins and losses, and it'll say the last time it triggered. There's a little piece of text here which says advanced or beginner or intermediate. That basically has to do with the actual option strategy that gets used. If it's simply buying a call or selling a put spread or something, then the strategy will be marked as, beginner or intermediate. And for things like calendar spreads that are a little bit more involved, they get marked as advanced. So you can kind of quickly see, what's happening there. Each one of these question marks goes into a detailed video that gives a whole explanation of how it was back tested, how it outperforms the market versus doing the same approach without the same technical setup, etc. And I'll show it off later, but in the Learn tab, you can really dive in deep to each of these different strategies. So for right now, what I'll do is I'll just look at this HAL trade today. So this is for all tickers right now, set up for all tickers. If you want to focus on stocks that have a higher capitalization and tend to be more liquid, you can just filter by any one of these up top. I'm choosing the largest 500 here. And here's this fade the dip strategy. And I'll show you exactly what that is, but it shows that for Halliburton that this triggered today, 6 wins, 2 losses. It's returned 108% over the course of those trades. So just real quickly, I'll show you, if you click on this, again, if you click the question mark, you can dive into details. If you click on the HAL ticker, it's going to actually pull up the back test, meaning it's going to pull up the historical track record of this trade with all of the settings that are built in here. And so what we see here is that this is a put spread, that it's selling a slightly out of the money put, and it's buying for protection one a little bit further out of the money. This triggered in green indicates that all of the technical conditions, which are shown here, are true right now, as well as any earnings conditions. The only earnings condition is to never trade earnings. And so in this case, it means that we don't have earnings within 2 days. And if we look up here, we can see that the next earnings for Halliburton are in April. So if you want to dive into any of the additional details, you can sort of click through any of the settings. If you click technical opening, you can see details on the technical settings, etc. And that's true of every strategy. Now, a new feature that we introduced is this show options. And this takes a lot of the sort of boring work out of, deciding how to put on the trade. For instance, if it's an earnings trade, you might have to make sure that the options expire after earnings, or sometimes one expires before earnings and the other one after earnings. So this, instead of needing to look up what the delta is on your options montage, and you should certainly double check, but this will just speed up the process quite a bit if you do decide that this is a trade that you are interested to put on. And what this is saying is that you want to, if you wanted to do this trade, you would short the 37 April 12 puts, and you would buy for protection the 36 puts. And that would be the trade. So that keeps it nice and fast and easy. And I'll just show you what that would look like in your Thinkorswim montage. If you use Thinkorswim, it'll look similar in various brokerages. But if you enter the ticker HAL, you go to the options chain, you go down to the April 12 options. On the right-hand side would be the puts, and you would just be selling the 37 and buying the 36 for these 12 Aprils. You'll note that there is decent bid-ask spread here. It's 57 at 89 cents, and so obviously you'd want to make sure that you had a decent execution on this, and I'll show you a little bit more of what you can do in TradeMachine here in a second. But you wouldn't want to sell this for 57 cents and then buy protection for 55 cents, because your max gain would be 2 cents and you'd be taking $1 of risk. So I will just look into another strategy real quick on the Today tab to show you what it looks like when a strategy isn't active. And I'll also point you to a resource for people that are new to options about how you can learn about all of the different spreads and deltas and all the terminology that might feel kind of confusing when you first get into it. So I'm going to look at this McDonald's trade here. It looks great. I actually wanted to put this trade on today, but it didn't quite stay true. And so it says there's a 306% return, and it has 8 wins and 0 losses. and there's a video here you can dive in. So if I click the ticker, now it's pulling open the trade, but it's saying it's not active as of the last time it was checked, which is right now. And of course, you can't place it after the market's closed anyway, but it is checking all of the stock price as of right now, etc. So what this trade is saying is that for this trade to be active the way that we've created the strategy, and you can create your own strategies to your heart's content, but it's saying that the stock would currently have to be below the 200-day moving average, but that yesterday the stock would have had to have been above the 200-day moving average. So this is essentially a cross. It can be crossing up or down. If you see the 200-day moving average and then the yesterday 200-day moving average, that means these will be different. One will be up and one will be down. It just means that we've kind of crossed up through or down through. So this one will be crossing down through the 200-day moving average. This is a strangle, meaning we're buying a call and we're buying a put. And the reason we like that downward movement is because oftentimes when a stock is moving down, the volatility starts to increase a bit. And these are the technical conditions that we've tested over time. And then we'd also want the stock to be below the 10-day exponential moving average. So those are just the technicals that are set up. If you want to create your own, then you can go as deep into technicals as you want. You can also just use the platform with the technicals that we've set, and not have to get into all of the details necessarily. When you click on one of these strategies and it gets pulled up, it pulls it up exactly as it was the last time we tested it. You'll notice that the end date here says March 11th. So this is when we generated this results of 8 wins and 0 losses, that was on March 11th. This technical conditions, it appeared here today because at some point today, all of the conditions were met for this technical thing. So this date, you can just go ahead and update to today, and it's going to still show inactive because this inactive is always checking today's value. So now we can see, it's hard to see down here, so I'm going to zoom in. So you can kind of see this blue line is a 200-day moving average. This green line is the 10-day exponential moving average. And the 10-day exponential moving average just looks at the last 10 days of stock data, but by exponential, it means that it uses the current data more than the older data. So in order to get a better look at what's going on there, I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom of the chart. I'm going to grab this bar and scroll over. Then when I go up here, in order for this to be active, it would have had to have crossed down through the 200-day moving average. Well, we can see it did that because you can see that the low point today was far below this 200-day moving average, but where it ended the day at the bottom of the thick bar is well above the 200-day moving average. And so that's why you're going to see that it appears on the Today tab as something that triggered, but it's always good to click it and then confirm if it's active at the time you want to trade it. And our backtester, the way that we simulate the market and we look at all the historical data and all the historical trends, we look at the data at the end of the day. It tends to be when the data is most liquid. A lot of the options volume and the stock volume happens at the end of the day. So the way that we've built it is that we are looking at patterns based off of the last 15 minutes or so of data. And so if you really want to stick closely to what the backtester and TradeMachine is doing, then you place the trade kind of towards the end of the day and you'd log in and you confirm if it's still active at the end of the day, which this particular strategy is not. For anyone who noticed any slowness today from TradeMachine towards the end of the day, now that we have this feature, a lot of people are logging in right at the end of the day to check things. So sorry for the slowness today, and we've identified the issue and we'll get that. We'll make sure that's nice and fast for you. One more thing I'll mention is that we get a lot of questions about, is there tests for liquidity and things? And there are tests for liquidity behind the scenes in order for them to, make it onto this page. And if there's bad liquidity, like a very wide spread, we will oftentimes show a warning message here. But if you're wondering how much liquidity is going to affect your particular trade, then there's an easy way to do it. So in this little settings icon, you can change the deltas, which is to say how in the money or out of the money each leg is. But you can also say, when I'm simulating this trade historically, I want to assume that I can get exactly in the middle of the bid and the ask. Or I can't do quite that well, but I'm not buying at the ask and selling at the market's bid. You sort of halfway in between. Or you can say I'm just getting market prices. So I'm buying at the high price and selling at the low price, kind of the worst case scenario. So if you put halfway, you can kind of see how much your performance gets hurt. And so at the halfway mark, we're still not hurt that much in this particular trade, which shows that the markets are pretty tight and pretty liquid. If we go all the way to kind of worst case scenario for execution, we can see that the trade drops down a little bit, but it still has a healthy return and a healthy wins-loss rate. And that's a sign that this is a pretty liquid, that the option chains are pretty liquid, that the market widths are pretty tight. But as you do that quick test, oftentimes you'll see that that's not the case. And if I go from mid-market to halfway between, and I see that all of a sudden I have more losses than wins, and I don't have no longer is the percent return positive, I walk away from it typically. That's just my personal, taste, because I just know that getting in and out is going to be too much of a headache, and also the quality of my execution is going to be so important. One additional detail is that you can drill down here. And if you click that tile, you can get in here and see all of the trades historically, and you can kind of click through and see each individual one. You can even download the trades and look at all of the details. Okay, I want to look at one more strategy. And so we can see all of these different strategies on the Today tab. And I just want to look at buy the dip for a moment, which is buying a call when the stock has been going down for quite a while but has started to recover. As always, there's a nice video there you can watch. I'm just going to click one because even though it's not active today, it's going to pull up all of the backtest settings anytime you click a ticker like that. And so what we can see here is it's saying that the stock is now above the 200-day moving average, but yesterday it was below. So it just crossed up through for it to be active, and that the stock is above the 10-day moving average, meaning it's on an upward trend, and the RSI is below 70, meaning that it's considered to not be overbought. Now I'm going to set this to the most recent day's data. But what I wanted to show is that when you're looking at a strategy like this for an individual symbol, you can always look at this like, hey, how would this do if I did a call spread, for instance? Like, how did this strategy perform? Like, well, hey, that looked pretty good when I actually did this as a call spread. But is that just a fluke? Is it a one-time thing that when I did this trade as a call spread, it just happened to do better? Or is there really a pattern or a trend there? You can look at different time frames. So now I'm clicking the 2-year time frame. This is still looking pretty solid. The next step that you can take to get additional validation is you can click this portfolios button at the top. And you can enter your own portfolios of tickers if there's certain stocks you like to trade, or we've created a lot here for different industries. I'm going to click the Dow 30 here, and it's going to test these 30 stocks. And first I'll do it as a call. And I'm going to see how these 30 stocks did with the kind of typical way that we have this strategy set up, this quote unquote buy the dip, meaning the stock had been below the 200-day moving average, but just crossed above. And that in general, for the last 10 days, it's been doing pretty well because it's above where it's been over the course of the last 10 days on average. So we see if you're just buying this slightly out of the money call that expires 30 days in the future, roughly. It'll find the closest one it can to 30 days in the future. If they're very rarely will there be one exactly 30 days in the future. That this strategy won in the Dow 30 for the last 2 years, 47% of the time. And the average trade return was 11% or 12%. When you're buying a 40 delta call, you'd expect it to end up in the money about 40% of the time. And so it's doing a little bit better than that right now in the last 2 years on the Dow 30. It's doing 47%. And the average trade return is solidly positive. It's at 12%. But the question we had is, well, what if I do it as a call spread? It worked fine in AON, but how is it going to work if I look at a larger basket? And I would definitely encourage you can test this against the QQQs or anything else if you were interested in this kind of trade, or if you just wanted to tweak technicals and said, you know, what if I want to look at MACD or any other technical? Now look what happened here. It went from a 40% were wins to 54%. And that's what you'd expect with a spread. Oftentimes you expect a higher percent of wins, but perhaps a lower average trade return, depending. But this one we won in both, because now the average trade return jumped from 11% to 30%. And so all of a sudden, this is looking like a great strategy. And now I don't want to just do it for AON, but I want to consider doing it for more trades in the market. The question is, how am I going to know when a stock crosses above the 200-day moving average, when the stock's above the 10-day moving average, when the RSI is below 70? I don't want to just log in every day and check 1,000 stocks, because that would be mind-numbing. So what we can do within the product is you can actually add an alert. And so you can go through and click on any one of these that you think look promising. Maybe I'll remove that Cisco, and I'll kind of just choose some of the better performing ones here. And in fact, if you want to, you can actually sort by these columns. I could just say, I just want the ones that have the highest average trade return. You can click and see any of the details. And like, hey, these look great. So now I'm kind of choosing the best of the best that have done really well with this technical setup and with this call spread. And I'm going to tell TradeMachine, I want you to notify me when these conditions are active. So I don't have to sit in front of my computer all the time. I have another job. So now I'm going to click Add Alert. It's going to set all of these tickers there for me from that previous trade. And it's going to set the technical conditions. And I can place any kind of note in here I want. I can say, buy the dip with call spread, great returns, trade it. Then it'll send me this share link. If I enter my phone number, it'll send me a text message. And then I click up here, add alert. And now for all of those tickers, it has set that alert, and I'll be notified directly to my email when those come true, and my note will be there at the bottom. There'll be a link in that email or text that will pull up the entire, it will say, for instance, that Apple triggered on the day, or any stock that you want triggered on the day. But it's going to pull up the entire backtest. So if you want to just look at the stock of interest, then what you do is just click that particular stock and that 40/20. And then you can look at this specific stock and the specific trade in order to get that trade loaded in here.
Hey, Jason, do you want to point out what you just did with the comma?
Yeah, exactly. So if you would just want to, when you do a back test within this tool, it by default will show you 5 different trades with different amounts of like moneyness, like different how in or out of the money it is. You can if you want to look at different tickers, you can enter 2 tickers with a comma separated between them. But if you only want to look at one trade, then you can just enter a single ticker with a comma, and it will only show you one. And the one it'll show you is the middle one here. So if I was going to be looking at a call spread, it would be using the 40 delta and the 20 delta there. Yeah, and so that's kind of a quick walkthrough of how you can go from taking one of our strategies and then tweaking it. All of the strategies are actually, all the Today tab strategies at least, a lot of the main strategies are saved directly here. So if you wanted to look at buy the dip or buy the sell-off or any of the other strategies we have here, you could simply click, load the strategy, That's going to load a save back test. You can say, I want to look at it for the last 2 years. And then if you want to, you could do a portfolio back test and dive as deep into this as you want to. I'll just make one note that there is a custom strategy loaded here. And custom strategy is if you want to do something like a diagonal or a broken wing butterfly or something like that, then you can enter the specific deltas and the days to expiration, etc. And you can be long or short calls and puts up to 4 legs of any kind of strategy that you want to create. So if there's not a default button here, then we create a custom strategy. Sometimes the names are a little bit funny because they've been around for a while. Okay, after that, I just want to quickly show community. So we strongly encourage you to jump into community. You'll find a really friendly group of users there. If you click the community tab, it will pull open the community. It'll just ask you to treat everyone with respect. And then right now I'm looking at TradeMachine. We have 2 different products that have access to their own communities. If I look on TradeMachine now, I can scroll down. I can see people's questions, trade ideas, things that are working. A lot of the back and forth is shown in this reply. So if you click show replies, you can see a lot of the back and forth, and feel free to just come and look at this for trade ideas, but or ask questions. I think you'll find the community is very supportive and responsive, and will have great feedback. So this is a great way to kind of get your hands wet and learn about everything going on. So we'd love for you to jump in there. And then also, just for a split second, I'm going to show the Learn tab. It's a great resource. You can ask about all kind of things like delta, and it will pull up articles, what delta is, why it matters. There's also quite a bit of education, and if you're curious about our AI, the skew and kurtosis, some really great videos in there. For someone who's real new, feel free under this education, if you start with the basics here, this is going to walk you through the concepts of options just from the ground up, really from the most basic, and then it's going to go deeper into spreads and implied volatility and the rest of the Greeks and all that kind of stuff. So there's quite a bit of material here, so we'd definitely encourage you to dive in.
Jason, if
Yep.
you want to scroll down, I was just going to point out that at the very bottom of the page for the options education, not only is it linked in order of kind of the what to watch next, but if you go all the way down, you can actually just click to I think it's covered by my Zoom bar,
Next.
actually, Jason,
Yeah.
sorry. There's a next button that will allow you to then move right to session 2, session 3,
Great.
and so on. So we made it very easy to know not only which ones to watch, but also in what order based on your experience level.
Yeah, exactly. This option speculation webinar from Ophir is pretty amazing because he covers a trade that lasts, I think, 9 months or something, or 2 different trades with, really looking at changing market conditions. So for more advanced users, that's a really awesome one. But yeah, with that, I'll just dive into a few questions. We're at about the 30-minute mark, so we can take some questions.
Jason,
Yeah,
did you
you
want
had
to?
something to share.
I was going to say, do we want to touch on this? So everybody, you should have already received an email about this if you're a TradeMachine member, but we just wanted to remind everyone that on Saturday, March 23rd, Ophir is going to be hosting a webinar, and what we're going to be diving into on that webinar is back in November of last year, Ophir introduced a portfolio of trades, talking about, it was kind of the first time he dove into the idea of effort and TradeMachine, and introduced 140 trades, which he has recently reviewed. And in the last 3 months, they have performed exceptionally well, and actually really outstanding. And if you look in your email, he does talk about that a little bit, but he wants to dive into the results specifically. And then he is going to introduce the next 140 alerts. So if you have not already, we want to invite you to register for that webinar. Anybody that registers will receive the recording as soon as it is available, generally 1 to 2 days following the live event. Jason, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Nope. Yeah, I think that's it. It's he's kind of revisiting the topic, and he does a ton of back testing and kind of figures out the next batch of trades that he's excited about to share with people. So we'd love for you to join that. And Amanda just shared a link there, so feel free to click that link.
Actually, I'm looking at it and it's looking like it's not sharing to everybody. Jason, can you copy that and try to share it to everyone? I'm not sure why
Yeah, it says,
my,
oh yeah, it said host and panelist. I
yeah,
think they changed the
that's,
default for
I
like
think
who
so.
it
And since
sends to.
I'm not a host right now, I'm not set up as a host.
Yep.
I think that's what it is.
Yep. Great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So very happy to take questions if people have questions, but we also can just leave it there if there's not too many. I see
We do
it
have a
says,
few.
yep,
Yep.
go ahead.
Do you want me to read or would you like to?
Well, the first one I'm seeing here from Chris is, it says, is it possible to put a timestamp on the trigger? Chris, you mean on the Today tab to show exactly when it triggered? Is that the idea? If you actually get an email, the email, it would come in at a specific time, so you'd see it in your email chain at a specific time. So if you get an alert to yourself, then yeah, you'd see at 12:32 p.m. or whatever that this trade triggered. This is an example what the email content looks like. The timestamp would be in your email. That way it'll be localized to your current time. So this will
If
say
it,
what the
I was just going to jump in. He specified when the conditions are first met, and that is the example for personal alerts, but the Today tab alerts do also specifically tell you the timestamp.
Well, they say the day, but they don't say the time of day that it occurred.
Let
Yeah.
me double.
So what's that?
I'm gonna double check. I swear.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Sorry,
Yes,
that she
I
makes
was
a good
gonna
point.
say.
If you set Today tab alerts to yourself, so on this screen, it's not going to show you exactly when it happened,
Correct.
but if you can click this set Today tab alerts, and then you can, pick the strategies that you're interested in and the groups of symbols you're interested in. Then if you save that, you will get an email, and at that point, it will tell you exactly what time the Today tab alert triggered, because it'll show it in your email. So yeah, good. That's a great point, Mandy. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. All right. The rest of the questions are actually in the chat. So do you want to jump over there?
Yeah, having a look. Do these strategies all use stop losses and profit targets, or do you let them expire? Typically they do. They don't always use stops and limits, but we test a variety of things with each one. Like the straddle, for instance, I think is set to just a very tight 20% stop, 20% limit. I think it's actually just a 20% limit, interestingly, on that one, because that's what we found performed the best. But it's really strategy by strategy. Now, they might expire anyway if those don't get hit. You might have a 20% gain on something that would your limit would get hit at 40%. But yeah, like this one, for instance, well, this is a good example. So this is take your profits if you make 20%. Don't worry about the losses per se. We're not gonna exit the trade because of it going against us for a short amount of time. Especially in a straddle, if it's going against you, it's probably because the stock's not moving. So we don't say like, okay, exit out because it's down 4% or 10%. But it does say once you've had the trade on for 10 days, then you can then it's time to get out if you haven't hit your 20% gains. So that's a good example where for each strategy we've really kind of customized the exit conditions. Some do go all the way through. I showed the kind of 13 strategies on the Today tab. This Pro Scan tab actually has even more. It has kind of some people want to see covered calls because it's really common. It's not something that we focus on. But many of these have particular settings. There's pre-earnings, post-earnings, these strangles the hold through earnings, etc. So each one of these that we've kind of tweaked to just find the conditions that when we tested for various time frames and against various baskets of symbols that we found performed the best. So it's really on a strategy by strategy basis. Yeah, and any strategy that you click, you can kind of go down and see how it's set. So this one, if you make 50%, you exit, and there's no other time that you would exit out.
There was actually a couple before that, Jason, so I'm
Oh,
gonna
okay.
jump back up and read those for you.
Sounds
Jason,
good.
what are some of your favorite strategies?
For me, it oftentimes has to do with how long or short I am overall and how I'm feeling just in my instincts about like the market. So if I have accumulated a lot of like bullish trades, then I might look for a, bearish dip kind of strategy just to balance those out a little bit, or, strangles if the market feels kind of sideways to me. Fade the dip is great because it has quite a high win rate. And anything here with this little AI symbol, uh, we definitely draw your attention to. These use some proprietary stuff that we came up with, that was using AI models to come up with. It gets represented as this skew 1 year, kurtosis 1 year. It's a little more complicated than that, but we had to call it something. But basically, the skew is saying that uh, when the stock moves, it tends to move a little bit to the upside or to the downside. So the more positive that number is, the more the jumps tend to be the upside. And the kurtosis is kind of how big the jumps are. But you can use these within the technical settings to play with them. To if you're able to in a basket of portfolio stocks, if you can use them to tweak, just to experiment with them and see what tends to get you the biggest results. But the ones that we've created that have the AI behind them are very powerful. And the more we've looked at it and the more we've tested them, the stronger, more powerful they've shown themselves to be. So definitely, these don't occur all the time because there's extra conditions that have to be met, but those are very powerful strategies. And then I do like in some of the slightly more involved strategies, there'll be these diagonals, especially around earnings events where you're selling a near-term option that's going to expire early, but it kind of finances a longer-term position that you might hold through earnings, or it might be, not around earnings per se. But those tend to do very well for me, and I really like how those behave because the time is kind of acting on your side, so you can definitely drill into those and get some more information.
How long do the technicals have to hold to maintain the trigger to enter?
Well, it'll be in that particular moment. So if it finds that the technicals are true in that moment, then it will execute the trade. Um, so occasionally you'll see a warning message like this. Sometimes there's not enough, like the option montage on a particular date back in time didn't have enough strikes or something to enter. Um, you can use it as a little, warning sign to double check the montage, make sure that you're seeing all the strikes you'd expect and that kind of stuff. But generally, it's not anything to really worry about. Um, but yeah, so it will. They just have to be true for a moment in order to appear on the Today tab, and they only have to be true in this second in order to get this trigger to appear. But if you want to follow the backtester as closely as possible, then you'd want to look at this kind of towards the end of the day. Um, and if I'm trading something earlier in the day, I might look like, for instance, I actually wanted to put on this trade, that McDonald's
It's long
trade.
technical
Yeah,
strangle.
exactly. I just filtered to see a little faster. Um, yeah, I wanted to put on that trade. Um, these get cashed during the day, but at night they get a little slower. So I wanted to put this trade on, but it wasn't met. And then when I looked at it, when I looked at it, it was hovering right around. So again, I'm going to click the 2 year mark to get the most recent data. When I looked at this trade earlier today, this last trade price was sitting right on top of the 200-day moving average. And so even had this been slightly under the 200-day moving average, if it was super close, especially if it wasn't at the end of the day, then I would probably check back later in the day. Um, but yeah, if it's in the last, 15, 20, 30 minutes of the day and the trade is active in that time, then that's good enough for me. So yeah, just in that kind of latter part of the trading period is what we would kind of point you towards.
Right. The next question is actually one that I'm going to refer back to support because we'll need some more information. but it looks like they're having some trouble receiving their alerts. So
Great.
in
Yeah.
regards
Well,
to the squeeze, email
yep.
support with all of the details and we will take a look.
Yeah. Sometimes we can see that an alert, we can actually see on our end that it did trigger, but it's not getting sent to you all the way through. Yeah, there could be various reasons for that, but yeah, definitely send that along to us and we'll dive in. We can normally get those things figured out.
What strategies do you find most profitable? You addressed that one,
Yeah, touch
correct?
on that a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody's having trouble signing up for the webinar. If you can't sign up through the link we just provided, email support will get you signed up one way or another.
Yep.
How is AI integrated into TradeMachine?
Yeah, a few different ways. We actually do some neural network modeling in order to uh, figure out how to combine all the different technical triggers. So we can do it through the backtester, and we do tweak and refine things to the backtester, but we also take all of the data generated from the backtester and plug it into a neural network and let it help optimize the technical conditions over a very large set of data. And the skew and kurtosis was actually LLM generated strategy uh, with a lot of back and forth and testing, hundreds of different times. So sort of algorithmically working with large language models in order to generate a strategy that um, looked at that, skew and kurtosis data in a unique way. And that's the one we flagged specifically as like, distinctly as AI. So that's what shows up there because that was used, used large language models in order to develop that. And this one so far, market conditions change. This so far from everything that we've looked at has just been phenomenally strong. So that's two different ways.
All right. Have you had more success selling premium or directional call or put strategies?
You know, a lot of very experienced option traders prefer selling options. Um, I tend to be a little, my personal style is I'm okay to lose, 40%, 20%, 30% a handful of times in order to get a big return other times. So I, it's always, it's often wise to use spreads where you're, you know, both selling premium and buying premium. I tend to lean, directionally in one direction or another, and I tend to own more options than I sell. I think a lot of experienced option traders, like to sell options. But that's just my personal taste. I have like something that I'm always looking for is I love it when a great company has got crushed by bad news. Um, where I feel very strong sense of conviction that the company is going to recover. And so then I might go and then use the back tester in order to figure out when these conditions have happened in the past and what's the best way that I could, enter into this trade, what kind of spread, what kind of time frames. Um, yeah, so those for me personally, I'm okay to, take some smaller losses in order to get some occasional bigger wins. That mixed with my overall strategy. So I might differ from some people in that respect. I do really love the diagonals though, where you're, selling the front month and buying the back month. I think those you have a lot of things that work great, work really well in your favor. A really powerful strategy. It's somewhat more complex, but on this save strategies, this broken wing butterfly, is a very, very powerful strategy where you're, yeah, very, very managed risk and, solid upside potential. This one's a little bit more involved, so I won't dive into the details today, but definitely encourage you to check out in the Learn tab and go into detail yourself.
Yeah, we have tons of videos on that one actually. All right, next question. Do I use the strike price to find the 40% or 60% amount?
Okay, good. I think so. There's a couple of places that the 40 or 60% could appear. So the delta and I'm actually was really hoping to gear this towards new users. So I like this question a lot, Alan. Thank you. So if you're talking about the delta, then in an options montage, if this says the 40 delta calls, 30 days to expiration, you can actually click the show the options chain here. It's after hours, so some things load a little slower. And from there, you can actually dive in and look at how many days to expiration things are and look at the individual deltas. Let's see if I have a screen here that shows delta from like your brokerage. Yeah, so here's the delta column. So put deltas are negative. So if it was talking about the 40 delta, so that you'd go into your option montage here and you'd look for what's ever closest to the 40 delta, which in this case would be this 37 strike. But then that would indicate what to trade, both the number of days out in the future and then the delta would tell you which strike it is. So right now that's the 37 strike. The reason we use delta instead of strike is because if something's 50 delta, that means it's at the money, regardless of what the stock price is. So if AMD goes from $12 to $50, 50 delta is still 50 delta. Whereas the 12 strike is a very different option if you're as the stock moves up and down. Delta also helps you get a little bit of a sense. Delta changes with time and as you go out into different expirations. And so delta is a more precise way to describe what option you want to trade than it would be to say like, well, I just want something that is $1 out of the money, for instance, or $10 out of the money, or even 2 or 3% out of the money, because something that's 5% out of the money, say that's expiring tomorrow, well, it's pretty unlikely stock is going to move 5% in one day. But if it's 5% out of the money and it's expiring in 180 days, well, that's pretty close to being an at the money option because the stock's going to move a lot more than 5% over the course of the next 180 days. Delta kind of captures all of that in a single number. When it comes to, so I think that's the 40 or 60% that you're referring to. When it comes to the gains or losses, like a stop loss or limit, that would be of the value of the position. So if you entered a position and it cost $2 per contract to enter, if you had a limit gain at 50%, then you'd say if the position was $2 to enter, then you would exit if it reaches $3. So that wouldn't be based off of the price of the stock or the strike, but it would be based off of the value of the position. So that there's two different ways that question could have been intended. I kind of went for both, so I hope that was helpful to somebody.
It does sound like it was. You
Yeah.
said 6.
Yeah, so I'm seeing from John. So yeah, that McDonald's trade. So that McDonald's trade was not active. It doesn't mean that it was a bad trade. It just means if you wanted to follow as closely as possible the way that our simulator works out, I mean, to use that kind of driving down a street analogy, it's kind of like, hey, if you wanted to arrive at your destination at such and such a time, then you'd leave at this time. So if you want to follow the simulator, then you trade it as close to the end of day as possible. And by the end of the day, that McDonald's trade was no longer active. That can happen and does happen. I've entered trades that were inactive at the end of the day that worked out fine. So it's not to say that if it triggered 2 hours before and then started moving, sometimes it might get a pop in the right direction early. Like had you bought this right down here somewhere, it actually probably would have been phenomenal because this, you're buying a strangle and you want movement and it moved quite a bit. So there's not really a right or wrong answer. But the closer to the end of the day that you place the trade, then the more closely you'll be following the simulator. What I will say is I do not personally place trades if they were active previously in the day, but they're not active now. I also am not particularly concerned if I see a trade is active and it's, I'm in the middle of my workday and I check this thing and I see that it's active, I will frequently enter the trade and not be stressed out about if it's active later on in the day. Many times if it's not active, it might dip below something and then start moving in the right direction or something. So, sometimes you can catch a little pop even before the end of the day happens. So I know that's a little bit of a nuanced answer. but I don't enter trades if they were active previously in the day and then are not active now. And if you want to follow the back tester, then you'd kind of wait towards the end of the day and make sure it's still active. Will you be adding additional option stats like IV rank and IV percent? Yes. We'll get the IV, percent back in there. We actually were consuming the data from SIBO, and then they just pulled the feed. I think they decided just to, some places don't like to sell when there's like a redistribution right on the data, so they pulled that data feed. We do have access to. I've done a lot of option calculations in the past, so we can create our own if necessary. But I think we actually have access to some of the same data through our options vendor, Option Metrics. So we do get a lot of requests for that, and we'll work hard to get that back in the tool as soon as possible. Well, guys, we're coming up on right about an hour, and I think we got through most of the questions. So really appreciate everyone being here. Please join that webinar with Ophir. That's going to be super awesome, almost guaranteed. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys next time. We're trying out a once a week rhythm to these. We were doing twice a week when it was initial and give people a lot of chances to answer questions. The next one I think will be Tuesday during market hours, kind of midday. So hope to see some of you there, and thanks everyone so much for joining. Have a great night. Bye everybody. Thanks Robert. Thanks Mark. Thanks John. David.